Okay, let me see. Reload.
Live.
And we are live. Welcome to Talking Cannabis. I'm here with Kenny Morrow, and today we have Etienne Fontan with us. We have Sam the Skunk Man. We have Richard Rose, and we also have Tom Alexander. And welcome, guys. It's really a pleasure to be with you all today.
Thanks for having me on.
Nice
Well, thanks
to
for
see you all.
everything you've done. You know, part of why I wanted to do this is you know, you, Tom, were a big inspiration to both Kenny and I. Are, you know, with Sinsemilla Tips for 10 years, you really were the definitive source of quality information for a lot of us. I honestly don't know where I'd be without what you've done, and I want to say thank you.
Well, you're welcome, but I feel honored that you want me in this group because you all know way more than I do. I was just a messenger boy, and you guys did all the work in the trenches, and you know, I don't know what I can add because you guys really did all the work.
Well, you not only laid the groundwork.
You built the foundation, Tom.
You know, I always say the cannabis industry would have gone forward and we just threw gas on the fire. I mean, it's like, you know, it would have happened. I mean, it's been happening for thousands of years and it just eventually came to the United States.
But the key word is industry. It wouldn't be an industry without people like you, because you know, the people are still growing with the techniques you taught them 30 years ago, and you got 3 generations of people growing that cannabis. You know, that magazine was very, very instrumental. There was no internet. There was very few places to get information. So every bit of your magazine, every issue of your magazine had really incredible information that, you know, whether it was just you know, just organic practices. I mean, that's you know, being utilized today. So.
And actually, Growing Edge, you know, I did that for 21 years. It sort of took off where Sinsemilla Tips ended, and
well, it went where it couldn't go. You know, there was a lot of legitimacy that you brought with Grower's Edge, which really helped me, as well as when I was dealing with hydroponics, to understand what other large industries were doing as we were learning to scale. In California, as we were dealing with medical cannabis, we were looking for ways to go larger, and most of your guerrilla growing had to deal with small and clandestine situations. So your large scale NFT systems and learning about aquaculture and all those different aspects of growing, and different plants that grew similar to cannabis, but also plants that grew completely different. It helped broaden everyone's perspective to our gardening potentials. And that I cannot thank you, because the foundation was Sinsemilla Tips, but you really built a house with Grower's Edge that left, I think, a legacy that many of us still benefited from.
You had 3 magazines on a large scale. There was Growing Edge, there was Practical Hydroponics from Australia, and Greenhouse Management. All 3 of those, you know, enlightened me to the fact that, you know, regular produce or flower growers deal with the same issues that a marijuana grower deals with, but how do you deal with it on a large scale in that environment? And Tom brought a lot of that forward with Growing Edge.
Yeah.
So I'm proud of what I did, but I think you guys took it to the next level. And you know,
Tom, what year did you first see Sinsemilla?
77. When I first moved to Oregon, I met. It's ironic that the first time I used cannabis in 1969 was with Vietnam vets that just came over from Vietnam. And then I moved to Oregon in 1976, and I immediately met Vietnam vets that came from different Vietnam vets that came from Vietnam, moved to Oregon and started growing like in the late 60s, early 70s. And so when I moved to Oregon in 77 is when I first saw it.
Wow. That's incredible. When did Bill Drake's book come out?
Right around the same time, 74, 75, 76.
Yeah, it was that the Sinsemilla book was for me when I first saw it. It was a wow.
That was Arctic and Woods.
Arctic and Woods, yeah. You know, there wasn't many books in the 70s and 80s that really shaped us. We're going to be having Mel Frank on. He's on vacation with his wife. Even though he committed to doing this, he forgot and he will be with us next week. But Sensimilia Tips, Mel Frank's work, Rob's work, without it, there would have been such a void. And this is really why I believe, you know, part of why I wanted to do this is because I feel very fortunate to have met my heroes, so to speak. I mean, when I was a kid, Mel Frank was a fictitious name on a book I never thought I would ever get near. And now he's one of my close friends. And to bring you guys together and to talk to you about this history and to bring up all this stuff about cannabis, I think is a benefit to everybody. I mean, and everyone here has inspired me.
It's also opposite of what the industry is happening. You go to trade shows and greed rushers and the vulture capitalists, they don't give a fuck about us. They, you know, they kneel at the altar of the dollar sign, and you start talking about the history and stuff and their eyes glaze over and they just go on to the next client at their booth. You know, it's like they don't give a shit about us. So it's an honor that you're honoring us that did it in the 70s and 80s. And
it's funny, Tom, because to be honest, I'm glad that people like that are involved in cannabis. That means cannabis is normal. It's just like Levi's or an automobile or any other alcohol company. You know, it's all run by bankers and lawyers. And
yeah, I agree. And just like alcohol, there'll be the craft niche market that's pretty sizable. I mean, InBev, Budweiser is buying up all the craft breweries, and you know that's going to be the same thing. The cooperatives and the collective brands that are forming now will be gobbled up by the venture capitalists.
Absolutely correct.
But they'll always be connoisseur craft, and these social clubs will be the places that it's highlighted. You know, the social clubs that have the top quality connoisseur craft cannabis will be the places people want to go. And there's going to be two kinds of social clubs. There's going to be the hippy dippy, and then there's going to be like the I don't know what you call it, sort of I don't know,
more modern. Yeah, I don't know how to do it, but you know, we've seen it. It's in Barcelona. I mean, if you look at Strain Hunters, they went in, they had money, they had a plan, they built a place with clean air and beautiful seating, and everything they wanted. You know, they had the money to do it from the ground up right. And then you had other clubs that were, you know, trying to, you know, score some couches out of somebody else's trash and, you know, build the place with, you know, matchsticks, and they were just as happy in both places. And I was just as happy to be in both places. I mean, you know, I admire the people like Strain Hunters and others that have had the cash to go in and show us how it could be done. But I also admire the people that have scrapped together what will become a place of, you know, sanctity for a lot of people.
Right.
If you think about cannabis going mainstream, well, mainstream means everybody, from the richest rich to the poorest poor. Yep. And we should, you know, cater to everybody.
Yeah. And that's what I saw when I was in Barcelona. They're taking the more expensive stuff like the hash, like BHO, which is very expensive, and they're actually breaking it down into quarter grams and selling it as quarter grams so people can afford to try it. And so that's another way that, you know, the market itself is showing and leading the way, because yes, exactly as stated, they want the best stuff that they can get in quality, and people will pay for it, and it will continue to be the trend until, I guess, you know, regular regulation or legalization takes place. But I mean, Catalan just legalized cannabis.
Absolutely correct. Just last month.
Yeah, so will be interesting to see how the government now oversees, because they say they are going to regulate those clubs. So there's the next step, is that government regulation steps in, because they're the ones that demanded, as Todd was talking about with Strain Hunters, the type of airflow systems that clean the smoke out, because in Europe they do a lot more cigarette smoking. So when I was in the clubs, you still come away smelling a lot like cigarettes. So they are required to have these I think they're €60 minimum type of ventilation systems, and you have to afford that. And that's not cheap. That's not easy. You can't piecemeal that.
No, unfortunately, when you get into a big space, they were in excess of €100,000 to install a good air turnover system. And Arian said it shut down a lot of the people that were really good people and trying, and they come through and say, oh, sorry, you're not compliant, and they close them.
One of the good things about government regulation is that they will test and make sure that extracts or cannabis or whatever is clean of pesticides and contaminants of any kind. And that's a good thing.
Absolutely. I mean, as a grower, I've always been thrilled that I can grow my own, because it's the only way you can guarantee that somebody's not spraying shit on it or mixing stuff with it that you really don't want to be inhaling. And I think now with things like, you know, plant growth regulators and stuff that can be really problematic, we actually do have to become a lot more of an informed consumer as we kind of move forward, because, you know, everybody's growing cannabis now, and there's not really the same reward as there used to be to grow clean organic cannabis, because now everybody's just trying to not lose their shirt as the price drops and get a product out. And unfortunately, I think that's creating a lot of bad practices, you know?
Remember when they tested samples 3 years ago, 2 years ago, 1 year ago, half of them were found to be contaminated with pesticides, so there are fungicides. So there is a problem that needs to be dealt with.
Well, the numbers came out in Washington State, which is, I believe, 62% of the product tested failed. Didn't state how much was microbial or how much.
Well,
was
Washington State's always trying to do better than California. In that case,
yeah, well, California number was 84, according to Haley Steep Hill.
Right, so, 84%.
Yeah, and there's a major competition taking place right now, and they just publicized how many of their entries failed as well, and that's kind of very telling. I don't know why somebody that was going to enter a competition wouldn't pre-test their material to make sure it was clean.
It's really simple. They think their shit don't stink.
Yeah, but you know what's causing this? It makes me wonder. You know, is the microbutanil or microbutanil? Is it systemic? Is it going generational? And that's what, you know, has been pointed out and suspected. So people are buying clones that aren't even being sprayed with these chemicals that are still testing positive, I believe.
Wow, because it's carrying through.
I believe the gene pool is possibly contaminated, if you will.
No, I don't believe that.
No.
If you take a clone of a clone of a clone, it ain't got nothing.
Well, Steep Hill's doing, you know, compiling data you might want to check out.
Well, I agree with both, though.
Because it's systemic, that's what they're finding.
Right, but you can outgrow a disease, and you can outgrow what would be how do
you can outgrow viruses? You can outgrow that shit.
Sure, with tissue cultures and stuff. But I'm not sure how many generations it takes till you stop failing microbial or testing.
No, and you know, the point is, if somebody treats their mother plant and then cuts clones and sells them to the club, damn right, you're going to absorb whatever it is that they already had just used. So sure, in that case, it may well have easily carried over. You know, one person I'd like to point out, everybody, is a dear friend of mine, Richard. You're sitting there quiet, but I met you a long time ago at the first Cannabis Cup, and Richard Rose had a Fortune 500 company and was making a vegan cheese, one of the first in Northern California. And he then went from making health food cheese to hemp cheese and became my friend, the Hemp Nut. And I just wanted to wrap with you too, Richard. I mean, you've been a huge part of the cannabis industry for as long as I've known you.
Yeah, thanks, Todd. We met, I think in '95 in the lobby of PAX Party House at 420 with pizza slices.
Pizza, yeah, I completely remember that. I got to be honest, you bring a stoner pizza, man, you're friends forever.
Right. And we gave out, I don't know, like 10 pies every day for 3-4 days there. And being in the food industry for 37 years, I'll have to say that cannabis isn't going to be normalized till we stop giving out lab reports with every batch and just put a cannabinoid facts on the back and get the act together so that you don't need to put out lab reports on every batch.
That's, yeah, there's going to have to be a lot of regulation involved to get to a point where the farms are afraid to put out contaminated product because they're being reviewed so closely. I mean, yeah, consumers deserve it.
In the food industry, the way that happens is the food companies take the liability, the processor, you know, so in this case, maybe someone retailing flowers or making extracts, but they have a protocol that calls for testing everything all the time, and you can't get past that. And that's why on the back of a food package, you don't see some steep hill lab report. You see nutrition facts, or the same on the supplement facts on hemp seed oil or echinacea or something.
I think there's going to be a huge turnaround in California hemp because, I mean, over 80% of all of the hemp goods that we consume at natural stores and health food stores come from Canada right now, right? Do you know what the number actually is, Richard?
It's Canada's influence is decreasing. A lot's coming from Europe. There was in 2014, we imported about $50 million of shelled hemp seed and maybe 11 million of hemp seed powder and about 9 of hemp seed oil. So it's still a relatively small market, and now extracts and other products coming from Europe and isolates and the like are probably pushing that to a smaller percentage every day.
Right. Well, now hemp is legal in California too, so I don't see why we're not going to see adventurous people looking to farm the protein, because the protein's the biggest market coming out of Canada, correct?
Well, the whole shelled hemp seed, the shelled hemp seed itself, the achene. Protein is second. At this point, they're pressing oil just to get the protein. But California has, and many of the states has unique challenges in terms of requirements, and it's research only, it's certified cultivars only, even though Southern California is a stretch for that. It's THC testing, whereas if you work with the university, you have none of those requirements. No certified seed, no THC testing. You could actually work on a GMO high THC cannabis through the hemp program in California.
Wow. So we might see fields of hemp pretty soon.
Yeah, apparently there's at least a couple hundred acres now in this season in California.
Well, up in Oregon last year near Corvallis, a hemp farmer polluted, I think it was like a 4 square mile area of people growing outdoors. So that's going to become a future problem. And up in Oregon, they want to delegate Eastern Oregon as the hemp growing area and Western Oregon as Sensimilla. We'll see how that works out.
Yeah, it's actually hemp's biggest future issue. The male pollen. It's some studies say hundreds of miles, thousands of miles, even in Russia. They said the pollution, and then
I think it's less than 100 miles. But that said, it's easy enough to produce all female hemp varieties.
Right.
Then there is no pollen.
Right. Most of the CBD hemp in Colorado is female only. But the reason hemp hasn't been legal until Proposition 4 is because of the medical grows downwind.
Yeah, well, I if you're growing cannabis outside and you don't expect cross-pollination from your neighbor's pot plants happening, you're naive.
Right.
Back when in the mid-90s, we had people in Northern California vying for hemp permits, and they got so threatened by pot growers around them for fear of pollination that multiple people I know have suspended trying because of that fear, as well as those physical threats.
Right. John Stahl actually built a fence about 12 feet high for DEA, topped with wire, with cameras, with lights, and it was like an acre or two. And he was going to grow hemp there to make paper, and he got threatened by growers, and so that was abandoned. But he already had the whole fence, and he was working on the DEA permit and the whole thing.
Was that John Stahl?
Yeah, John Stahl in Mendo or Humboldt County.
Yeah, he was trying to do the 404 tax stamp, et cetera, trying to do everything proper, and just to show the stupidity of the entire system.
John came over and visited us in the Netherlands. He was interested in what the IHA was doing at the time.
Yeah.
There's going to be a lot of changes in the cannabis industry. I think there's going to be a mix of hemp, and there's going to be a lot of people growing cannabis now.
Well, hopefully we'll lose hemp altogether. That's actually, we're trying to work ourselves out of a hempster job. Ideally, there's no delineation between the two, and we just deal with them by either end use or something more rational than 0.3 or 1% THC.
So I guess all the outdoor pot growers would hate my all-male hemp variety. Did you know that male plants produce superior hemp fibers?
Fibers, yeah, I've heard that.
Well, I'm thinking that's like a government farm subsidy program, Sam. Maybe growers should pay you not to grow it and be their neighbor, right?
I'm willing to let them pay me not to grow it.
I'm coming to your neighborhood and taking bids to not grow it.
I love it. I love it.
More land for the land bank.
Yeah, yeah.
Future mafia activities.
Oh,
We're gonna move in next door.
I'm gonna make it out you an offer you can't refuse.
I once went to a property with a client to view the facility, and I noticed that on the corner of the block was a daycare center, but all the toys had price tags on it, and all the whole building and everything else had fresh paint. And the real estate broker says, I'm sure for a couple $1 million we could make the daycare go away. And I'm thinking to myself, I wonder who built the daycare.
Oh my gosh. Well, you know, the state of California hasn't passed out any licenses yet.
For weed or hemp?
Yeah, for either. I mean, have they passed out any for hemp? I did.
At the state level, no, they don't have the regulations in place, but cities are granting permits as we speak.
You know that hemp growers in Europe made more money from the subsidy than they did selling their crops.
Wow.
That's why I mentioned it.
1 year, yeah. The cap program's decreasing, but 1 year, Spain, if you look, there's a spike in European, I think it was 2015, it was the Spaniards growing it for fiber. It got to a certain age and then they could walk away from it and still get the subsidy.
Wow.
Yeah, I know someone that got paid not to grow cotton, so that was a fascinating thing to me.
Yeah, getting paid not to grow pot is really interesting.
Well, considering the person probably spent time trying to get to that point to actually grow the pot and then all ready to jump off, and then they're like, I'll pay you more not to.
There's a USDA program just to pay farmers not to grow crops, leave their fields fallow.
Wow. Well, in some situations, I guess it actually is smart, but I mean, I don't think we're going to be convincing cannabis growers not to grow cannabis now that they are only facing at most misdemeanor.
You're absolutely wrong. Farmers are very savvy people, and if somebody wants to pay them not to grow, you better believe they'll be happy as long as the money's worth it.
They also have a large percentage of crops that are being grown. They're paid not to grow 40%, but they still grow 60%. But in the process of eliminating the 40%, they artificially stabilize the price of their 60%, so to speak. So it's in their best interest to not grow, to keep the prices high.
Right. That's a lot of what the USDA program is to take
Exactly.
production out of production from time to time.
Yeah. Same thing with milk and a bunch of other dairy, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, change is afoot for sure. I mean, I'm excited about what's happening. I'm glad to see that there's been a decline in trying to prosecute people. And I'm glad to see that the case has been getting dismissed all over California. That's some of the best news to me out of the whole thing.
I'd like to also congratulate Richard, because Richard Rhodes was absolutely one of the foundational people behind pushing hemp foods. It barely existed in America before he did it. It existed somewhatly in Russia and Asia, but not much else.
No, Richard's a big part of why I'm still so healthy. I mean, when I first read the chapter in Jack Herrera's book about nutrition, I actually didn't believe it. Honestly, I thought I was so skeptical of everything, balanced essential fatty acids, more protein than beef and chicken and fish, and none of it made sense. And the more I got into it, the more I realized, wow, it's totally true. And I mean, way back when I had the San Diego Compassion Club in '95, Richard was sending me hemp burgers with shelled hemp seed in it, and was a main staple at the place, to be honest. We got cases, and I thank you to this day for those. I really appreciate it the whole time.
Yeah, but you also took the ribbing and the jokes and all the ungodly stupidity from the ignorance regarding hemp foods and really kicked that door in by just being persistent and by not listening to any of the bullshit and just keeping to your plan. It helped educate further because they got past the puns, they got past the stupidity,
you
and
can't
got to see
blame the people for hassling him. I mean, let's face it, Richard's focus for years was nuts.
It still is. We were able, because we were a professional food company to start with, it was easier to deal with the whole get high THC issue. Also, we didn't have medibles around back then. We had space cake and that was about it, goo balls. So we didn't have this whole issue of marijuana edibles to deal with, confusing people. Plus, it was before HIA sued DEA to be allowed to have THC in foods and oils. Usually when you do that, people assume you have THC in your foods and oils. So Richard, it's much harder today.
When did you first get turned on to cannabis?
When I was 15.
That's when you first smoked it?
Yeah, that's when I first smoked. I was getting, my bipolar was starting to express, so I was self-medicating. And then I worked on Proposition 19 or 37 in 1972.
19.
Yeah, 19 in 1972. And I worked on that. I wasn't even old enough to vote yet, but I was out educating and stuff on it. And then started making tofu in 1980. And then in 93 or 4, I read Chris's book, Chris Conrad's Hemp Lifeline in the Future. And that's where I learned about the protein. And I've been working with soybeans since 1980, tofu and tofu cheese by that time, tofu-rella and everything. So I decided, because I came out with kind of a new cheese every couple of years, I decided the next one was going to be hemp.
That's a great thing. I mean, you've been vegan for a long time. A lot of people don't realize that. You're, leather-wearing biker, but you're vegan.
Right. Yeah, leather-wearing vegan for 37 years.
But a lot of people don't realize, I think it's about food quality. I joke with people, hey, if I gave you a Ferrari or whatever your dream car was, you wouldn't pull up to the gas pump and put in shitty gas. You'd put good gas in your hot rod car. And why we pull up to the pump and put shitty food into our only body, it's, to me, really ironic. I mean, because if you totaled the car, I could go get you another one. But if you total your body, you can have freaking Beatles money like George Harrison, and there's nothing you can do to fix it. So I say, preventive maintenance is key. And, I switched over to a more healthy lifestyle really because of a lot of what you had taught me, and a lot of really putting together the dots and realizing that a lot of people that go vegetarian, go basically anemic and get out of weight and fuck off their health, because realistically they don't consume enough of a balance of essential fatty acids and quality proteins, and we just don't get quality food most of the time. So anyone listening to this, go out to your local health food store, pick up a bottle of hemp seed oil and start putting it on everything. Pick up shelled hemp seed and start sprinkling it on all your food, because you deserve good nutrition. I don't know how else to put it.
You'll feel better. I mean, I'm called, everybody tells me I'm 60 going on 20, and I assume that diet had something to do with having enough energy at my advanced age.
Yeah, I think
so. Grow your own vegetables. A lot of cannabis growers are monocrop. This morning I picked bushel of tomatoes and Swiss chard and onions and potatoes, and I mean, eating fresh veggies is equal to connoisseur cannabis. I mean, it gives you a high of energy.
Yeah, I totally agree. I'm glad I had cancer at a young age, to be honest with you, because it really gave me a passion for health, and it really gave me motivation to try to, once I obtained my health, to try to keep it. Sorry, everybody goes quiet. Fuck your health food. No. But you know, it's amazing that it's cannabis again. I mean, this is kind of what blows my mind. I mean, cannabis has got to be the most versatile plant on the planet. I don't know of any other plant you can use in so many different ways.
My plan back in the 90s was to disrupt 15% of food soya in the US with hemp seed, shelled hemp seed.
Wow.
What percentage did you actually penetrate?
Not nearly that much, but it's about 1 million acres we need to do that.
1 million acres of hemp. Wow.
Yeah.
Well, there's a lot of, you know, there's Kentucky is growing a lot of hemp right now too. I've seen what they're doing. It's incredible.
And that's leading to a lot of businesses like, you know, that are small tooling industries to manufacture decorticators, harvesters, et cetera, because people like John Deere International Harvester won't even start to look at manufacturing any type of specialized equipment until 1 million acres is actually grown. They've actually stated that. So that's agricultural standards. So until then, small toolings and manufacturers are going to reap those benefits until then.
Yeah, a lot of them are coming out of China, like the shelling machines and the oil pressing machines.
Wow. What's the scene? And now, you know, Richard, you're based in Europe, and what's going on in Europe with hemp, may I ask?
Well, there's a hemp food revolution in Italy. There's a vegan revolution in Italy. There's probably about 12 hemp food companies in Italy. They're growing about 10,000 acres this year. And they're all certified. They're starting to do tobacco here. They call it marijuana light, and another one's easy joint. It's just, you know, CBD hemp flowers, compulti and others, and it's sort of pissing off the old school hempsters, the fiber guys, because new stuff seems to have slower uptake with some people. We see it, you know, trying to explain to old school hempsters about CBD hemp 2 years ago was one of the more difficult tasks. They're the most resistant to it. So there's more and more food. We're seeing, like, there's even a straight cheese manufacturer that puts hemp flowers and seed in a cheese. It's one of their best selling cheeses. Gelato. You know, it's happening on a small scale. It's happening on a large production scale, pastas and biscotti and things like that.
Well,
and that's just Italy.
As we see, like I know in Kentucky, they're going to start infusing some of the hemp seed oil that they were selling for health food stores with CBD. Are we seeing that over there?
Not that particular thing, because hemp seed can you know, the flowers. So what they're probably doing is just not doing a thorough cleaning when they press the oil.
No, they're adding it. They're extracting it and then they're adding it because they don't want it to be a contaminant. Anybody listening, the hemp seed oil, when the plant makes the hemp seed, the oil inside the seed has 0 cannabinoids. And it's only if the outer hull of the shell is rubbed against the resins on the surface of the plant, does that then as a food get contaminated with CBD or other cannabinoids?
Right.
Correct?
Oh, no, that's correct. That's called an adherent. And if you don't clean your seed well, you'll have higher THC, for instance, up to 50 parts per million. If you clean it well, you'll have none because you cleaned it well. Now, there's some ambiguity in the food laws in Europe, different countries with CBD, and it hasn't really been settled yet. People aren't therefore infusing any foods with CBD, adding it in, but they are using flowers that have CBD in them. And there's also the whole smokable, you know, tobacco knot pots. It's huge in Switzerland right now. They're going through thousands of kilos a month on it.
Wow.
They call it placebo and knot pot tobacco. Different names. Switzerland, the THC limit is 1%. In Italy, it's 0.6, 0.3 in the US and Canada.
I wonder if that's something we're going to get away from, because, you know, now that it's legal to grow high THC cannabis, what's it matter if there's, you know, medium THC hemp?
Right. Even Colorado, you could grow conceivably 30% THC weed a whole lot easier. You don't have to register compared to hemp, 0.3% hemp. You have to register and pay the fees and all that. So it's actually more legal to grow weed than hemp in a lot of these states that have recreational legal laws.
Wow. Wow, that's interesting. Yeah, Sam, you know, how many of these CBD varieties are hemp in origin?
I'm not really sure.
Some of them,
None of except the exception of Finola, none of them are going to be certified seed that they start with. All of the high CBD cultivars in Colorado are proprietary. Auto 1, Auto 2, Cherry, New West Genetics, those are all proprietary cultivars. None of them, because there wasn't a requirement for certified seed in Colorado, they got to get the jump on genetics ahead of every other state, which does require certified seed, most of them. To be 7606 compliant doesn't require it, but still they do that because they've been talked into it.
wow. Well, we'll see if things change now as, you know, the understanding of cannabis changes and people demand it to be treated differently, because a lot of the stuff that we're talking about came out of prohibition era policies.
Right. And they're talking about the next farm bill, which will be next year, to raise it to 1% from 0.3.
Sam, someone asked in the chat if you ever crossed haze with a hemp plant or a CBD plant.
No, I've had no interest in CBD. I mean, CBD to me is really valuable for some people, but I have no interest in CBD.
Can you explain how it blocks a person's ability to uptake cannabis?
Yeah, it doesn't block the person's, but it just doesn't get you high.
Right, but does the CBD molecule kind of rest in the same receptor as the THC molecule and kind of not allow?
Absolutely not.
Okay. So then how does it interfere with our body's ability to absorb THC?
Well, I like THC, but if you smoke CBD first, then it reduces the ability for THC to get you to the place that you may want to be.
Right. THC is definitely my favorite of the molecules.
Yeah, but if you're all about ensemble or entourage effect, where you got to add CBD to your THC dabs.
If that's what you want, but that's not what I want. You don't need other cannabinoids because they don't get you high. If your goal is to get high, then you want THC. CBD will delay the onset of THC. It will reduce the peak experiences, and it will also make those reduced effects last longer. But
did you see the British reporter that did IV THC and then IV CBD and THC? THC only, she's very dark, very paranoid, very, not having a good time, but on the combination of 1-to-1, she was giggling for no reason and happy, and it was just a much different experience, much like the pot in the 60s and before y'all read it out.
No, that's not true at all. Pot in the 60s was THC only.
So how did it become THC only?
That was done by farmers all around the world by smoking it and realizing that they didn't want the pot with other cannabinoids besides THC primarily.
So they were just selecting for
Right,
the
it-
high as early as when? The 30s? 50s,
Thousands of
60s?
years ago.
Thousands. You're right. So just through basically human natural selection, you feel that CBD was kind of left on the side of the road due to the fact that it didn't
Well,
make people feel the
it's-
same way high THC plants did.
It's more that farmers who were breeding for THC, they didn't even know what THC was, but they were breeding for plants with high THC and the right terpenes. Whereas, for example, hash farmers, they bred cannabis for lots of resin. And they ended up with plants that were often half THC and half CBD. And if you smoke that at the same time, meaning like Afghan hash resin, you get high. Absolutely, you get high as a kite. But the effects are different than it would be if you were smoking ganja that was THC only. The effects are quite different than THC CBD hashish from Afghanistan.
I think the old creeper weed was high CBD types. Half hour to get high.
Right.
Maybe creeper was higher in CBD. That could be possible.
Because it has a shorter half-life than THC.
Wow. Well, there's room for everything. I mean, as we learn more about the cannabinoids and how they affect us, I think that they all become valuable depending on your medical condition, depending on your personal preference, depending on what you're dealing with in life. A lot of people might enjoy smoking cannabis and, believe it or not getting that high because they want to do things and function, but they need something to take the edge off of whatever they're dealing with. Like I always deal with chronic pain. I don't necessarily always want to be so stoned out that I can't do things with my time.
The tobacco market is about 5 or 6 times larger than the stoner market. So the market for people to not smoke THC but CBD dank buds in place of tobacco or weed is much larger than the ones who just want THC.
Yeah, I think that, I've always really enjoyed smoking a joint. So even when I've gotten dabs and other ways that are arguably more healthier or more potent, I've still gone with my old standby, which was doobies. So I guess it's also a matter of preference, of what someone might enjoy. I don't expect somebody with COPD to want to smoke a joint of tobacco or high CBD pot,
Right. A lot of it is people we all have this friend who gets anxiolytic, gets all anxious when they smoke THC, and so they don't like burning, and so they're the one person in the circle or at a party who's not smoking. Whereas if they have CBD buds, they have something to smoke. They can fit in, they can socialize, and not get worried about getting all cataleptic or stoned on the couch and not moving for 3 hours.
Sure. No, I see it. I clearly get where you're going with that.
I don't know anybody like that, Richard. Everybody I know likes to get high as a kite.
Yeah, but the ones that don't, their girlfriend, their boyfriend, whatever, their husband, their wife, we've all seen that type where they smoke and they're cataleptic and they're not having a fun time.
No, I agree with you. I've met many people who are not having a fun time.
Yeah, I think cannabis helps us a lot. A lot of people have an easier time when they've got cannabis in their life, which is why I'm kind of pro big canna coming along. I don't care. I don't care if big factories move in and start making pot for the masses, because I would personally love to see Campbell's putting cannabis in a can and selling it for 89 cents in every supermarket. I think that it would help people. I think mids would help society a lot more than cheap wine and cigarettes have.
They'll probably grow it on yeast though, GMO.
Yeah, we're gonna have, like Tom said, there's gonna
it's not cheaper to grow it on yeast than it is on cannabis. With cannabis, you can get 20-30% of a target compound. With yeast, it's not cheaper than growing cannabis. Cannabis is cheap. Well, I know the people doing it, and they're not even close. And even when they're doing it cheap, and in the future, it's not going to be as cheap as growing it. I mean, you know how much it costs to grow acres and acres and acres of cannabis for seed or for fiber. Not very much. And if that was switched over to high THC varieties, I mean, the truth of it is the entire market is all based on prohibition.
Right. It might have processing considerations for them also. They might not want to start with a plant. They might want to start with something more controllable, like yeast, sterile yeast even.
Right.
Plants are just as controllable as yeast. I can breed for a single terpene, a single cannabinoid in large amounts. I mean, yeast, you're right. You can, and the yields of yeast are not higher than the yields of cannabis. Now you can do it in big giant vats and get lots of that target, but with cannabis, you can grow it by the square mile.
Wow. Yeah. That, you know, and this is going to change the concentrates game on a massive level. I mean, how big will the rosin presses be for those hemp fields?
They'll drive through the fields and harvest an acre a minute.
You know, can I?
Fresh.
This is not an advertisement for Walmart, but did you all see that Walmart now has a rosin press on their website, and it's $2.99, and they're selling cannabis?
Free shipping. Amazon charges $20 for shipping. Walmart's free shipping.
They've had bubble bags on it for a couple years.
Yeah,
then we're going mainstream then.
I mean, I was selling them containers of hemp twine 20 years ago, so that doesn't surprise me. I mean, they've kind of always been on the capitalist side of wherever they can make money. Now, I did see those presses, and they don't look like the quality presses that I have seen. What did you think of it, Kenny?
Yeah. Maybe for the beginner. I mean, after you get yelled at for using your girlfriend's hair straightener, I guess you move on to that. But yeah, it wouldn't be my apparatus of choice.
Are you saying after she complains about getting her resin stuck in her hair, then
That's
you move
what I'm
on?
saying. After she lost enough hair and she's half bald.
well, Leafly this morning said they ordered one and they're going to write a review once they get it.
Oh, that's classic. I love it. Yeah. You know, I'm glad to see the acceptance happening is more of why I'm thrilled with it. It's not like I shop at the place or I plan on buying one, but I've always hated on the fact that we have just been so oppressed. And we were talking before the show that, you know, now the next wave of commodity is going to be culture, because it's going to be the people that host the parties and that have the social clubs and that open up the cannabis cafes, because that's the next stage of this, moving out of our living rooms and into public arenas.
And I play hockey and softball with guys my own age in 50s, 60s, couple guys 70s. And when it was illegal, they wouldn't even consider it. Now we get together, they consider it, they just because it's legal, change their whole attitude of trying it again.
Yeah, the attitude, you know, Bob Marley always said in that song, emancipate yourself from mental slavery. None but ourselves can free our mind. And I believe that is massively true when it comes to cannabis prohibition, because when you believe it, you feel it. And when you don't believe it anymore, all of that goes away. And, you know, when I experienced Amsterdam and you could walk up to a cop reeking like cannabis, show him your high times map and ask him where the other coffee shop was, and he chuckles and sends you on your way. It really changed the vibe that I had between myself and law enforcement, because I always shied away from them, to say the very least. And when I got to Amsterdam, I could just be like, hey, excuse me. And I wasn't anything but someone he would be polite to. So I'm hoping to see this change for cannabis consumers in California too, because we shouldn't be the enemies. You know, everyone.
It's funny, Todd, because here in Amsterdam, it's been traditionally very, very relaxed about cannabis, very permissive. And now the last 5 years, it's been getting worse and worse and worse. And while the rest of the world is liberalizing, Amsterdam is becoming more conservative on the subject.
That is ironic. I mean, to be honest, and they're missing an opportunity. I already think that Amsterdam moved to Barcelona, in my opinion. Barcelona is the new Amsterdam. If you're going to Europe, don't go to Amsterdam. Go to Barcelona.
They don't have enough canals in Barcelona.
They have more Gaudi buildings, though. Barcelona, I thought the scene in Barcelona, I went to a shop there, G13. I thought it was far superior to the experience in Amsterdam. It was more gezellig. It was more convivial. It was.
No, I had fun in Barcelona, but I've had a lot of fun in Amsterdam too. But right now, it definitely is swinging conservative.
I heard there were, or I had read recently that there is some sort of legalization for individual growing in the Netherlands.
No, just for two. There is for two medical patients that got permission from the government, but it's also what is it when a legal case is binding for everybody else? It's not for anybody else.
Precedent.
Right.
One of them had MS, and I think the other one might have been an AIDS patient, but I could be mistaken about that. But they have been given by the federal government in the Netherlands permission.
Did they have to petition the government direct or the health ministry?
They had a court case, and they won it.
Well, did they take the Dutch government to court, or would they arrest?
I'm not sure if they were taken to court. I think they were both arrested at various times, but I'm not sure of the fine details.
Well, even in Italy, the anti-mafia unit and the police union both have called for legalization outright.
That's great. Greece just legalized medical cannabis a couple weeks ago.
It's funny that the mafia would call for legalization. You'd think they'd like it illegal so they could make more money.
No, the anti-mafia unit.
The anti. Okay, I get it.
Yeah, it makes sense. But you know, I honestly think that we all should want to go legal, because being able to use banks, being able to not worry about our stuff getting stolen, not getting locked up, these are huge bonuses in life.
Yep.
How about you, Kenny? Did you enjoy getting in trouble?
Didn't enjoy it.
Didn't enjoy it either. No, I just would have rather been left to my own devices, to be honest. Yes.
It just struck me as odd as getting in trouble for a plant.
Yeah.
Just
illegal agriculture.
I'm in trouble for a fucking plant. This is just.
To be really honest, that's why I never stopped growing cannabis, because I went, there's nothing that makes sense about prosecuting me for being a florist. To grow flowers, I'm growing flowers, and you're going to lock me up with murderers. It just didn't jive with me, and nothing they were going to say was going to convince me that I was wrong. And here we all are. 20 years ago this month, the feds were raiding me at my home in LA. And now 20 years later, we're sitting here having this conversation. Cannabis is legal, and we the minority are becoming the majority, and we won. Our arguments won, period. The federal government's going to have to make a change.
No, we're not the majority. The majority is still conservative, and they vote.
The culture wars are over. Culture won.
Clearly, though, when you look, Sam, at a place like Florida that's absolutely conservative, 71% of those people voted for medical cannabis on the last election. That is a lot of people.
I understand that, but I'm not a big medical, that's not my push. My push is recreational.
It's all medicinal.
Yeah, I call it adult use, because I say that even a 14-year-old can have recreational use. I know I did it, but adult use is just that, adult use. And
well, I am an adult, so I'll say adult use. I don't have to say adult use. I'm saying recreational, and I mean for me.
Sure. And I say adult use because it just defines the conversation. I think kids that are sick should have access to cannabis, as I did, but that we have to be realistic about stuff. And I think there has to be an age.
I don't think kids should be waking and baking when they're 10 years old or even 15 when I first smoked. It's a bit young, to be honest, if the person goes to it and sticks to it and does it a lot, I'm not sure it's so great. If you're smoking just a little bit occasionally on the weekends, it's zero harm.
Yeah, I don't want to see kids smoking weed either, but as a kid that smoked weed, it certainly helped my life. So
then, I mean, that brings up a great debate then. What age is the age? We all have every human has an endocannabinoid system.
I don't think that's what should determine it. It should be the maturity of the child.
Yeah, that's a harder thing to judge, though. I get what you're saying.
It's harder to judge, but it's also reality.
Sure.
Smoking weed at 15 is a symptom of an underlying problem. It's not about smoking weed. It's, in my case, is because my bipolar is expressing. So I started smoking weed to manage it successfully.
I did it for fun and to meet girls.
Well, that's because you're a player.
He did grow up in Hollywood, so.
Right.
Yeah.
I met two people one time a couple months ago, and they were kind of polar opposites. One was a 22-year-old Ethiopian girl who said that she's wanted to grow marijuana since she was 6 years old. And the other is a gentleman from Morocco who's 20 years old and says he's been a third-generation grower and quit school, I think he said, at 8 years old and started growing the family farm. And the way I found him is he followed my page on Instagram, and I went back to it and I was like, wow, this is, back in the 70s. But then I quickly realized that it's not the 70s. This is this kid's front yard, which is as far as the eye can see of cannabis. It's pretty incredible to think that those two individuals knew what their life vocation was at such early ages, and that in today's world, that's a luxury that's almost afforded to them in their geographic locations, if you will.
I guess what I'm really saying is that really, really, really great cannabis, if it's consumed by fairly young kids, might seem more appealing than studying, going to school, and education, which I think is pretty important. I mean, get your education first, then party.
Completely agree. But what I found fascinating about those two 20-somethings is they were more fascinated with the cultivation aspect of it than the consumption aspect of it. And that's what was really enlightening to me.
In Colorado, when they legalized, the kids stopped smoking as much. The teen use went down. Elder use went up.
It's amazing to see when we have legalization, when you have actual factual figures that are documented coming in, like that figure right there, or the amount of people that would consume cannabis rather than consume alcohol if it was legal and given a choice. So those middle Americans we talk about, I believe they should have access to, call it non-craft marijuana, because those vape pen cartridges of so-called mid-grade cannabis is going to be much healthier and better for them than the current imported cannabis they're consuming now.
When I was in Denver, the first day, January 1st, it was legal for recreational. A lot of the people were like older than me, dressed in their Sunday best clothes. A couple's there to buy weed. We're gonna, we haven't smoked since we were in college, and dadgummit, we're gonna do it now. And it was pretty funny, and that was reflected in the data thereafter, that as the kids saw us gray hairs coming out of the dispensaries, it was no longer as cool.
Right. Well, the thrill is gone. It's no longer illegal. Then that was part of the attraction when we're in my youth, or all throughout where I grew up in southern Louisiana. It was spoken in hushed tones, and nobody, unless you were really clued in, it stayed away from you. Just limited availability.
Not only that, Etienne, but I'm going to open up one of those smoke places in Barcelona or Amsterdam or something, and I'm going to make it so that what it is it's all like bathroom stalls. So you go into the bathroom stall and you smoke it, and you can get high like you used to.
Call it Sam's Club.
And you got a fake cop that rouses everybody on the hour, Okay, what the fuck's going on in here?
Did you say call it Dare Club?
Real paranoia rush?
Yeah. Hell, there's the name of your club, Adrenaline.
Is Dave there? Is Dave in there?
Everybody gets rousted. All right, fucking.
Empty your pockets.
That is hilarious. Well, you know, nothing like being high and having a cop pull behind you. There's always a rush that goes with that.
I think the famous words were "down on the ground, motherfucker."
Right. Well, there's also virtual reality. You could do it all in the privacy of your own home. All of that.
You can have your own virtual prison experience through the drug war game. Yeah, how fun.
Daddy, tell us again about when you got arrested for marijuana. Daddy.
Oh, I don't think I'd like that story time. It would be long.
Right.
Which time? Which decade? No. Hey, all I could say is be polite to cops. Right.
Well, you just have a long succession of stories.
When I was your age.
I love it. But, you know, I mean, this is the other thing. It kind of, you know, when I was younger, I started growing cannabis when I was only 13 years old. I got my first Mel Frank book by trading my friend's older brother, who was a whopping 19 years old, for a bag of pot for his book. And it forever changed my life. And I don't know, again, like if it wasn't for you older hippies, what would have happened to pot? I mean, where would this all be now? And that's why I think of things like Sensimilia Tips and Indoors Growers Guide and Marijuana Botany. And these things were not just your average books. These things changed the lives of millions of us. And look at where cannabis is now because of it. I just can't stress that enough.
To be honest, if it wouldn't have been us, it would have been another group of people, and right now they'd be having a show.
I don't
No,
know. Yeah.
even
on another planet, maybe. Yeah.
Even if nobody did books or videos, it would have spread by word of mouth, because, you know, just word of mouth in one area to another. I mean, when I did tips first time, I had heard about Humboldt, so I just jumped in the car and went down to Humboldt, and, you know, it blew me away seeing the culture compared to Oregon's culture, which was pretty vibrant. The growers in Oregon in the late 70s were really vibrant, but the scale, the larger scale of Humboldt and Mendocino just blew me away. And it would have happened without any of us publishing books or doing videos or anything, because the word of mouth and people seeing it and learning that way. But it did accelerate it, and I'm glad it all happened. It was a fun ride. I mean, I got so many stories. I mean, you know, I stopped at Sam's house in Santa Cruz one time, and between his house in Oregon, I must have went to like 4 or 5 parties and gatherings, and just, you know, just felt the culture.
I remember when you came and you took a photograph of a plant, a small plant I had growing, very small, a seedling, and it was, you put it, I completely covered the soil with seeds, so it looked like there was a whole pot of seeds.
That was a cover. That was a cover photo.
Yeah, I remember. I've got a copy of every one of your issues, Tom.
Well,
speaking of books, there was also other books that came up, whether it was Cannabis, Alchemy, Marijuana Chemistry by Starks and by Gould. Those were very interesting because they focused on hashish production, oil production, fairly early on. But like one of the first books that really showed me the passion, the art of cannabis, was a book called Sensimilia Marijuana Flowers in 1976. That book was, it took marijuana to an art form, you know.
Yeah, that was Arctic Woods. Absolutely great book. It
was amazing. And another book that really captivated my attention was Hashish by Samui Laval from Quartet Books. Even today, you know, I won't bother any of you asking you if you've met him, because nobody I know has met him. He's never been around.
I've tried to find him also, and I could not.
John Julius Norwich, the co-author of the book, I've looked into him, and he is very much an English socialite at 87 today. I'm not sure who Samui Laval is. I mean, I'm someone that through the years I've sent, and this is the book that I'm speaking of. It is just the most amazing book ever. And what kind of passion did this man have in 1984 to produce such an amazing book with such great color photos, and the thickness of the paper, and the passion of this thing just blows me away every time I touch it. It's just, along with Rob's book Hashish, it's just like a holy grail thing. And it's just,
you know what's a funny story about that?
Mesmerizes me. I've contacted Quartet Books multiple times. I sent them emails, sent them written letters, begging to find out who Samui Laval is, if I can interview him, if I can talk to him. They never reply anything else. And besides, you know, you can simple Google search and you'll see old stuff, but like, who is this man? Where did he go? Where was he from? I mean, this is an amazing, even today, all these years later, what an accomplishment. This book is just absolutely amazing.
And this is the book you're talking about.
That book, I mean, as a 16-year-old kid, when I seen this book, maybe even younger, it just blew my mind. It opened my eyes to the art of cannabis, more so than just a picture of a botanical picture.
What's the copyright date? Is it 76, 77?
I believe it's 76.
1976. David Crosby. Sensimilia writing the forward.
There's two authors.
Is it really David Crosby, or is it Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young Crosby, or is
I believe, but there's two authors.
Johnny's Garden. Yeah, Jim
it is.
Ark Woods and Jay Bogart.
Eric Woods.
But
what an amazing accomplishment. If anybody knows who those gentlemen are, every time I go to I went to one time to Kona, Hawaii, and they had a used bookstore down below, and I always asked, do you have any marijuana books? And typically that's the one I want to run across, and I pick it up for like $15 to $30, and I've got 3-4 of them, and they're just awesome.
Kenny, one of these days you're going to have to come to Amsterdam so I can show you my book collection. It'll blow you away.
I would be incredibly honored to do that, Sam.
It's amazing. Sitting with Sam and going through his collection is utterly fantastic. And thank you for doing it with me in the past. I have a small collection of Tom's books through the years. I got some going back to when they were newspapers. And also when they were really nice covers, really full color glossies. And this one, Tom, I always wanted to ask you about more. Because of now, of course, extraction is such a huge part of our everyday world here. And when I saw this, everybody watching, this is what looks like to today's hash maker a closed loop hydrocarbon system, but is really a closed loop alcohol system. And this appeared one time, I believe, in Sensimilia Tips.
Several times, 82 and 83. And a guy also was selling HID lights and hydroponic systems, and it was like a barn. He had a farm near Eugene, Oregon, and selling all that stuff out of the barn. He was selling the extractors out of the barn. But then he had a heart attack like in 84, 85 and died, and I don't know what happened.
Wow. So this was, were these fairly popular back then, Tom? This was called the Honeybee 454. I guess 454 stood for 454 grams of cannabis that you could put into this part of the tube and get your extraction from.
How
popular were these back in the day?
He said he sold a lot of them from the ad, and I think he advertised like 4 or 5 times, and always on the back cover, and he also advertised HID systems, and Agris Tech was his grower supply business. I don't know what he sold the extractor through, but then he just died, and nobody else ever advertised. But he said he sold a lot of them.
Well, it seems like it was the foundation of what we now use as a closed loop extractor. I mean, obviously, we all have heard of honey oil back in the day. It was very rare, but we know that they were using alcohol to make these extractions before they were using butane and propane and water. I mean, this was around long before there was water extraction.
Here's Tom's first edition.
Oh, that,
you recognize it?
we did that edition at our cabin where we got busted with 1,200 and some plants, and I bought a Kubota and farmed it, and it was under a kerosene lantern. I had no publishing experience. It was under a kerosene lantern with a typewriter as the typesetter, and like rubber cement to glue the paste up board. And my finger took some of the type. You can see some of the pages. My finger took the type off, and I, instead of typing up and repasting, I just penciled in the letter, and it's pretty funky, but it was the birth of the magazine. And I went to Humboldt with 1,000 copies and immediately sold them out in Humboldt, Mendocino. And then,
and do you remember, this was your competition? Of course, this is quite a bit later. Do you see this?
Go down a little further.
Can
A little
you see
more.
it?
A little further down. Pull the book out a little further down more. Down. No, not back, just down.
There
Put it in front of the little stuffed animal. That'll be just fine. Yeah. You could prop him up right there between his legs. We can't see the top of it still.
It's Old Homegrown Quarterly. Old Homegrown Quarterly.
oh yeah. Out of Canada, wasn't it?
I don't remember where it's from, but I've got all those too.
I think it was out of Vancouver, BC, but oh no, Aeon, this lighting company and hydroponics out of Novato, north of San Francisco, I think they put it out, and they were some shady characters, let me tell you.
Was it 1980, the first Sensimilia tips?
April 1st, 1980, yeah.
Spring of 1980.
Yeah.
You guys are so ahead of the curve. It's not funny. That's amazing. You know, Sam, when can I ask, when did skunk first become part of your life in vernacular?
76 is when I bred it.
Wow. That's amazing.
Started.
What was the original land cultivars that you used to make this amazing plant? If we can ask.
It was Afghani, Colombian, and then times earlier Acapulco Gold Mexican.
So it's 4 different varieties?
No, that's 3.
Oh, okay. Acapulco Mexican was 1, right? Acapulco's in Mexico. Sorry.
No problem.
So it's been a 3-way. So is skunk? So skunk one is really just a 3-way plant. What do you think made it so exceptional that it became part of all of our modern genetics?
Well, I think probably the main reason is because it was the first seed company in the world, so it was the first really widely distributed variety. I think that's more than anything. Somebody had to be first.
Right. It was Sacred Seeds?
Correct.
What year was that?
76, 77 it started.
That is incredible. So can I ask a little bit about haze? Because obviously, so 2 of the plants that you best known for is your skunk, and what you're really the preserver of haze. Anybody that likes haze really should thank you for your diligent work of keeping it around. But how did haze start?
There was a grower in the Santa Cruz Mountains who grew some Colombian gold seeds. He also was growing at the same time a Punta Rojas, red Colombian, and a mauve colored one. And those 3 mixed, and maybe the first year was like 68, 69. And then in the early 70s, it was called the Original Haze. And it was a 3-way Colombian cross. And every year it was bred to itself. Because of the small population numbers, it became slightly weaker. And so after about 10 years of doing that, they started growing something else, and they quit growing it, but I preserved it.
Wow, that's fantastic. It's still one of my favorites to this day. hazes always stood out to me. As soon as I got to Amsterdam, and
haze is probably the finest Simsimia ganja that I've ever smoked in my life, to be perfectly honest. Of course,
Wow.
you know, I don't smoke very much ganja. I prefer to grind it up and remove the resin.
Right. But it makes amazing resin as well. I mean, some of our highest returns are with haze varieties when it comes to if you're harvesting oil or resin.
And of course, what I like about the haze is the terpenes, because if you look at it, it's just THC like all the rest of them, but it's the terpenes. That's the key. They potentiate and modify the effects. And when you get a really good one, you get that ceilingless effect where no matter how much you smoke, no matter how long you've been smoking it for how many hours or whatever, every time you take a hit, you get a little bit higher.
Right. Yeah. There's something amazing about it. I totally agree. And it's a clear high for some whatever reason. I've been able to.
It can be very clear. Some of the purple hazes were, you know, a bit more physical and more not as quite as clear, but they were strong as hell.
Yeah. Right. Wow. So there really was purple hazes floating around back in the day.
Oh, absolutely. No,
has that all been subject to modern day testing?
Ask that again.
What was
Has
that?
As you know, all those varieties been subject to modern day testing? I'd be curious to see.
No, because they're not around anymore. I mean,
Gotcha.
people have what I've done to save them, and what most people do with haze is they make hybrids, like super silver haze and stuff like that with Northern Lights.
Sure.
And then they get spectacular results because haze is funny. Right now, in its pure form, it's only about 10% THC. But if you cross it with, let's say, a skunk that's 15% THC, then you start throwing out children that are in the 20s. So it's like 1 and 1 makes 3.
Wow, fascinating.
That is really interesting.
Yeah, I'd be curious to see, you know, subjected to modern day analyzation methodologies, you know, what the chemical composition of it is.
Well,
why
it's just THC, but because I've analyzed lots of them, but it really does have unique terpenes.
That's what I'm saying. I'd love to see the terpene profile.
Yeah.
That is really what a lot of was missed for a long time, that we were just testing for cannabinoids and not looking at the terpenes, and we didn't realize the way the terpenes affected and modulated the cannabinoids. And I think that's where a lot of the early testing in the cannabis industry really fell short, because it was only giving us, you know, in a black and white picture, it was only giving us the black or the white. It wasn't really giving us a full look at what was happening or how it was working.
Well, to me, like the cannabinoids, they are the skeleton, especially THC. That's the foundation. But when you flesh it out with the terpenes, that's what makes it beautiful or ugly or whatever you want to call it.
Right, the way the terpenes modulate the effects. So this is why when a cannabis plant dries out and there's no terpenes left and the scent's gone, the taste is gone, and it dries and it's crumbly.
And if you analyze it, the cannabinoid levels are practically the same.
That's what
the terpenes are gone and it's flat and it's horrible.
Right. What's that? Somebody asked, what's the dominant terpene in haze?
You said it's not
depends
subject to
which haze. I mean, there's so many different clones floating around, and most of them aren't pure. So, yeah, first thing you have to know, is it pure haze? Very, very few people grow pure haze because it's inbred and it has a lack of vigor. Most people use it for hybridization.
Darn it, where's Chimera? He could tell us the answer to these things.
He didn't come on. He was going to come on and he didn't make it.
He's probably watching us laughing.
That's hilarious. Oh, I'll send it to him one more time. It would be nice to have his voice on in this conversation. I want to see a lot more haze get into our varieties. There's a real lack of it in North America. There's always been. And
doesn't have to be just haze. Any really, really great tropical, equatorial, unique terpene variety mixed in with other things produces incredible results.
I just wrote an article kind of along those lines that, you know, back in the day, you know, the tools that were at our fingertips were literally our fingertips. Growers rubbed their thumb and forefinger on a plant, decided, ooh, that one smells the best, and that's what I'm breeding with. You know, we very rarely ran males to their full flourishing to see, you know, what was their wet weight, what was their dry weight, what was the biomass, what part was usable cannabis and what part was waste. You know, those things should dictate a breeding program. And now with, you know, companies like Phylos Bioscience doing genetic tracking, marking, sex identification, tissue culture storage. There's a lot of technology at our fingertips that are really going to lead the breeding programs of tomorrow. So
well, not only that, Kenny, but because there's a legal crop, you're going to get PhD trained breeders that will really be able to make major differences.
100 proof. There's already, you know, the next generation, youngsters like Bam from highest grade. He went to UC Davis and asked if he could take their genetics classes, and they were like, well, what do you do? And he told them what he did. And they said, yeah, we'd love to have you just take a statistics class. Once you pass your statistics class, come back and take these other, you know, you can take any class you want. You know, so they're very welcoming at UC Davis and high level in genetic breeding and stuff. So that, you know, he's literally taking those classes now, and he's the second individual I've met that have taken these classes. So it's going to get real sophisticated really, really quick. But just, it's amazing when, you know, a grower can sprout a seed, take a leaf specimen, send it to a lab, you know, tell if it's infected with microbutanol, tell if it's male or female, genetic market.
Kenny, you can say if it's going to be a male, but and by you can presume if it's not a male, it's going to be a female.
Sure.
But you can't tell if it's going to be a real female that's not intersexed.
Got you.
There is no test for this yet.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Richard.
You can also tell cannabinoid ratio from the synthase test when it's a baby.
Yeah.
Well, from the synthase, you can predict what it's going to produce, but you need a more adult plant before you can say what it will actually express. Just because it has a capability, it also, for example, needs the sites of production. So you can't tell if you can tell the general ratio, but you can't tell the amount.
Right, but if you're breeding it, doing it in 10 days versus, you know, down the road 70 days.
Yeah, but you need both.
Right. No, but if you're trying to specifically do it at 2 to 1 or something.
The amounts of production.
Right, but if you're specifically trying to do a 2 to 1 or a 1 to 1 or something, that would
identify it. Right.
Yeah, you can decide if you want to grow it out or not from that.
Right, and then see what its full expression will be.
Right, and see what your total resin, total
and therefore decide what you want to breed.
Right.
Yeah, because cannabis resin yield is dependent not only on the genetics of synthases and these sort of things, but also on the ability for the plant to produce lots of resin.
Right.
Right. Can I ask you then, Sam and Tom too, is there any truth to the fact that when you bring a plant up higher in elevation, it makes more resin?
I've never seen any real proof of it, but it could be possible. But I think the reason why the best dope was coming from up in the mountains was because they were far away from the authorities and they could produce more. I'm not so sure.
No,
I'm not sure.
Yeah.
UV tolerance.
Yeah, I was just going to go there, Richard. It's like I don't know either, and Dave and I had another guy that I know had a conversation regarding this. You know, the UVB application. You know, it's been proven, and we know that it does sanitation and semi-sterilization to plants as far as powdery mildew, etc. But there's long been talk of the UVB accentuation of THC production. So what I did was I went and I purchased all the Research Institute of Pharmaceutical Sciences papers, and then I went through each and every one of them methodically as far as like what was the research paper, and then you figure out similarities like Malberg and Kim and a few others do positive research as opposed to negative research, and then you compile everything that has to do with the whatever subject you want, say UVB. So I've got a compiled book of nothing but 30 years of referenced papers in the Research Institute of Pharmaceutical Sciences papers, but I consider it all flawed. You know what I mean? They did this in a vacuum. They didn't really prove anything in the end. But what I got considered the largest compilation of data that I know of, anyway.
I did a trial using identical plants with the same clone. Well, actually, 3 different clones. I did a CBD clone, I did a high THC clone, and I don't even remember what the third one was. But then I put several different rows of these clones away from a UVB light. And what I found out was that the ones closest to it got burnt and zapped and killed. The ones in the next row got slightly fried. The ones in the third row were not so negatively affected in any way. And the ones in the fourth row, none of them had a THC increase because I checked it by gas chromatography. But other people swear that it does. And I know in the Netherlands, they've started using in big greenhouses where they grow strawberries and other fruit like this, they use UV transmitting plexiglass because all glass stops most of the UV. But the plexiglass allows it to go through, and they found out it improved the flavors and smells of berries.
Yeah, they put UV inhibitors in coatings for greenhouses to extend the life of the so-called structure as well as the contents. But, you know, people going into existing structured
glass itself stops 90% of it, Kenny.
Yeah, I know. And that's, you know, there's a lot of Half Moon Bay just, you know, got the bright idea that they were going to allow cannabis production in their existing greenhouse structures, but not allow new existing or new structures to be built. And you know, that's kind of a death knell to whoever grows in those greenhouses because they've got major UV inhibitors in their coatings. So
well, no, Kenny, they'll do fine in the short term. In the long term, when somebody's producing one that has UVB that is better, then they're in trouble.
Sure. Well, first they got to get over the marine layer influx, the powdery mildew situation, and burning lights a lot more than they should. So I wouldn't recommend growing marijuana in Half Moon Bay.
No. Didn't you take a patent on UV protection of plants in the past?
Yeah, UV application. Yeah.
UV. What did it cover in a sense then? Was it a PM problem or was it, what did it address?
No, it addressed accentuation of colors and regular flowers, and it also dealt with cited other papers to do with THC production, but also sterilization.
You said accentuated colors, it made it prettier.
So if you put a pansy under there and subject it to different spectrums of light, it'll express different colors.
Yeah, wow. So I didn't.
But to get back down to my trials on UV application to cannabis were similar to Dave's, and I did a lot of this research and I compiled a lot of data, but I still have no conclusive evidence. I know it does sterilization, and you know they have, as you said, in the strawberry and tomato industry in Holland, they have carts that they run UV lights down the center, but that's more to deal with bugs and disease. But
yeah, no, they use that against mildew and other problems.
Correct.
But what they've been doing is they've replaced the glass roofs with UV transmitting plastic, sure. And that's what's made the biggest difference.
Yeah, and then they run the carts down the aisles and stuff. But I still am looking for the holy grail. You know what I mean?
What you've got to do, Kenny, is you've got to grow varieties that are mildew resistant. Anything with Afghan blood is not resistant.
Yeah, no, I was more relating to does UVB accentuate THC, higher elevation, this, that, the other thing.
I have not seen the proof yet.
I haven't either.
I tried. But
there's a lot of stuff written, so it's like
lots of people. John Lydon is the big one.
And Colorado
too, I believe.
Data sets on that. They're growing as high as 9,000 in Colorado.
Mm-hmm.
Can I ask you about Haze a minute, Sam? Did you? Neville is really one of the most widely known breeders with Haze, just because obviously his hands were all over NL5 by Haze, and he won a shit ton of cups back in the 90s. But didn't you give Neville Haze back originally in the day?
Yes, he got it from me. Correct.
That's what I thought. How far back, can I ask? How long was he breeding with Haze before we saw things like the NL5 by
Well,
Haze?
he didn't have it before 1985 when I gave it to him.
85, you gave it to him. Holy heavens! So he had it for a long time.
Well, that's maybe to him. I had it for a decade before that.
Sure, of course, of course. If it wasn't for you bringing it, none of us, we wouldn't.
No, it would have existed, but just in a hybridized form. Big Sur Holy Weed had haze in it and other varieties, but it was hard to grow haze outdoors in the Santa Cruz area. If you had a greenhouse, it was a cakewalk. But if you tried to grow it outdoors, you really need to be further south. Like in Los Angeles or San Diego, it does wonderful.
Yeah, right. Though, but Big Sur Holy Weed is still not something that you can find in the Bay. I mean, you could walk into some of the biggest cannabis clubs in the industry, and what they're calling sativa is really Jack Herrer.
Back in the 70s, it was special. It was really, really good.
Yeah, I heard that it was $200 an ounce for haze back in the 70s when a Corvette was $4,000. So comparatively, it was super expensive compared to the cost of living and the cost of other products.
Now, Thai weed was $100 an ounce, and haze was $250.
In what year?
Probably 76.
We didn't have ounces. We had fingered lids.
You old hippie.
Two-finger lid.
I'm thankful my mom had a scale by the time I got into it in the 80s. So I actually had quarters and eighths. What did you see this stuff, Tom? When you were editing Sensibilia Tips, were you getting varieties of cannabis? And was this how was the sharing of genetics back then?
It was where I lived, Corvallis, it was mainly local, and once in a while Portland people had some different varieties, but it was, and it wasn't really named. It was just what it smelled like.
Tom, did you see clones before you started Sensibilia Tips?
I saw a couple guys did clones, but mostly seeds. Yeah, it was seed. The late 70s was mostly seeds.
Can I ask you, Tom, because you know a lot better than most, how much does the hydroponic industry really have cannabis cultivation, to thank for its expansion and innovations?
A lot. I mean, you can do 3-4 crops or more, so it accelerated everything, breeding and making people rich because they'd get so many crops. It accelerated it rapidly. But now I help promote chemical hydroponics, and now I'm totally organic, outdoor evangelist, organic all the way. And
good for you, Tom.
In a way, it was a reaction to the law enforcement crackdown of the 70s, 80s, 90s. And now that it's, not a threat in a lot of states, outdoor is the way to go. I mean, it's just it's, again, a personal preference. I grow all my vegetables outdoors. I grow all my cannabis outdoors. It's basically a personal preference, but it's again, everybody has their own preferences.
But in some ways,
I just wanted to say too that I didn't give Neville the haze. I sold him a few seeds, and then he took the variety and renamed it Neville's Haze, and eventually sold it to another seed company. So, yeah, whatever.
I've always wondered, how many true varieties do you think there are? I mean, there's been magazine articles, 2,000, 3,000 people are throwing around, but I think it's more like in the hundreds. What do you think,
Well,
Sam?
if you look at varieties like maybe a land race, like Lebanese or something like that, then there's definitely at least a few hundred drug land races, maybe 300-400 around the world. They might be interrelated, but they're separate and they're different, and they can be maintained by large populations. Whereas cultivars, clones, there's thousands.
Well, you know, it's interesting because in the Cannabible version 1, the best part of the book, in my opinion, was Rob Clark's forward introduction, and he talks about how there was only a handful of cannabis varieties that really shaped the whole cannabis scene in the 80s. And that's something I would love to talk about when we have Rob on in the future weeks, because, you know, a handful of plants, skunk one being one of them.
Skunk and haze were fundamentally like 70% as part of the makeup of 70% of the things for the next 5 or 10 years after that. But then everything started being renamed, recrossed, everything. So now everything is really a mixed up mishmash of what I call a multi-poly hybrid.
Could you explain that for people that don't understand what that means?
Well, a multi-poly hybrid is, okay, you have a basically pure landrace like Colombian. You cross that with an Afghan landrace. And so the F1 produces a hybrid between those two, and it'll probably be very vigorous. And if you're lucky, you might get some really good, interesting quality. But when you then cross that again with another similar hybrid that somebody else has. So now you've got multi-poly hybrids. And what happens in the end when you keep doing this kind of stuff is you actually have a little bit of everything that you're trying to add to it. So it doesn't get as much hybrid vigor if it's being crossed with its brother or its sister or its, you understand? The way you really get hybrid vigor is by having populations that are not related to each other at all. And then you get a shining example of one, a shining example of another, you cross them, and wham, the hybrid vigor that you get sometimes is fucking amazing. The less they are related, the better.
Right. So, you know, we were having a conversation last night that a lot of these guys that are calling themselves breeders, I would call mixers, because they're really not breeding with intention. They're just mixing together complex hybrids and then swimming through all the different phenotypes that they're getting. And it's really not breeding. It's really just.
Well, and if anybody wants to try to maintain a land race, for example, it's not so simple. I mean, first of all, just to keep 99% of the genes intact, you need to have 1,000 males and 1,000 females. That's the very minimum. And otherwise, every year you reproduce it, you're going to lose genes. Anybody who's maintaining a landrace with just a couple of males and females, every year is more of a tangent from the original gene pool. It's just a portion of it.
Wow. Wow. So can I ask you then, could you define for people that are watching, you know, an F1 is obviously the first generation of two distinctly different parents. Then what is an F2? What is an F3?
Then you take those F1 seeds and you grow them and you cross them to themselves. And then 25% will come out like the mom, 25% will come out like the dad, and 50% will be somewhere in between. So it's a nice way to see segregating populations, and you get much more selection. And F1 sometimes can be incredibly consistent. They can almost look like clones.
Right, absolutely. I used to work for Serious Seeds, and I used to grow out seeds that Simon made, and they did come out extremely uniform, but that was what Simon was breeding for. He tested all of his seeds before he sold them. He used very different plants, and he had intention of what he was trying to create. And I think this is the true marks of a true breeder, comparatively to people that are just taking plants that they don't know the origin of, mixing them together, and then acting like they're doing something. And honestly,
yeah, I mean,
I find it humorous.
To really do breeding, you need to do progeny testing with cannabis. It's an outcrosser, so the only way to know if you have a great male is with females, you can pretty much tell by looking and smoking and everything else. But with males, the only way you can really tell is by making hybrids between the male that you want to pick and several other males if you're choosing between a particular variety, and grow out huge amounts of the progeny, thousands. Then you got a good idea what's going on. Until then, you're just guessing.
Well, we haven't been able to grow thousands of anything without the fear of,
No, but that's all changing now. It's going to be a real world out there. But by real world, I mean with really competent people who are doing these things with other legal agricultural crops for the last couple decades.
Do you think there's a lot of people criticized Arian for running around with strain hunters, but I thought that it was actually very forward thinking of him, and I think that people should start really trying to bring an appreciation to indigenous varieties that have not been crossed into.
Well, I have two things to say about that.
Go ahead.
Number one is, if you look in their catalog, they don't sell any land races. Number two is, they were handing out all female seeds everywhere they went. And the biggest problem with these landrace areas is contamination by Western genetics. It's happening worldwide faster than you could believe. And it just means that when we go there, we're not going to be able to get that same F1 kick because it's already got multi-poly hybrid Western varieties genes in them.
Okay, so everybody watching, if you go around and start your own strain hunting, please don't bring them shitty seeds and corrupt their varieties, is what you're basically saying.
Yeah, well, it's been happening since the jet age started in the 60s.
Well, but can you speak about Jamaica then? Because Rob told me 20 years ago that there wasn't any varieties of actual, Jamaican left in Jamaica because they were so quick to adopt what they thought were better genetics from Europe.
Jamaica, Mexico, Morocco, all three of them. There is no pure land races there anymore.
They've all been contaminated with. I use the word contaminated because I don't know how else to describe.
Well, it is
Western breeding.
And Morocco is actually the fastest because the other two countries, they're growing Simsimia, or they're trying to, in Mexico and in Jamaica. So in Morocco, they purposely grow seeded weed for hashish production. So that means they don't care if a few males are around, which means that everything gets pollinated with these new Western genes. You get it?
Yes. Yeah.
How do we prevent that in Africa?
I'm not sure there is a way, because you've got to prevent not only the Westerners, which we can try to reach, but the locals who come to some guy, local yokel from Ugga Bugga, Africa, goes to Amsterdam, picks up some seeds, takes them back because he thinks he's helping his friends. Well,
right. I'm actually more concerned about they're starting to grow European certified hemp seed in 0 latitude like Kenya. Malawi.
That's not going to perform at the 0 latitude. We know this. We
worked
quite
about the male pollen contamination of their indigenous legacy.
Well, that's a separate issue, but yes, that could also happen. Correct. But I'm less worried about that because you can instantly tell if a variety's got half hemp or something. It's pretty easy to tell when it grows the next generation. You may have to toss the seeds, but that's not the real biggest problem. To me, it's the loss of landrace local genes. That's what it took hundreds of years for local farmers to select those. And I think it's a real crime if we send Western genes all completely around the world just because they produce a little bit fatter or a little bit more resinous or a little more something, it's more photogenic, and I prefer the diversity to be preserved.
Yeah.
I think we all want that, but unfortunately prohibition has forced this type of change, which has become this ripple that has become this wave. That is the as you said, these bastardizations that we're all dealing with across the board. You know, to get something of, you know, pure awesome is harder and harder to find, and so it has to be found, and that's why
something that's all the same, you know, because it produces it faster or bigger or more gooey or whatever. I don't want that. What I want is something unique that I like. And I'd like to keep the diversity for everybody in the future. We don't own that diversity. We're merely caretakers.
That's a great way to look at it. We have to caretake it for the future generations as well.
Because we don't know what they are. They haven't been subject to modern analyzation, like I was saying earlier. And you're correct that you know, the first thing that the kid from Morocco asked me is if I could get him 32,000 seeds, and so that's all he wanted was Western seeds. From
that's way too late in Morocco. Morocco, you cannot find pure Moroccan keep or original Moroccan land races.
Not even polluted.
They don't exist.
Yeah, not even polluted stuff. They just forsaken the old world cultivars for new world genetics. You know,
mostly what they're growing down there is all female.
Yeah, it's just capitalism, you know.
Would you say the same is in effect for Lebanese? There's no original Lebanese strains?
I don't know, because my best friend who was tied in with the Lebanese families, he's dead now, so I don't get news from Lebanon anymore like I used to. I really don't know, but I presume this is every country I've talked to. I've heard stories like this. It's just Mexico, Jamaica, and then Morocco were the first to get overwhelmed completely that I know of.
When I had access to hashish in Saudi Arabia, the Lebanese that we had access to, I've never had any hash like it. And I've been to Amsterdam. I've tried the Nepalese temple balls and every other type of hash, but I've never been able to find anything like that since. So
yeah, well, see, the advantage with Lebanese had over Moroccan is Lebanese was really pretty high quality plants. Moroccan keep and hashish plants, they were pretty funky, so I could see why they wanted to make them better. I just wish that we would have somehow preserved them before they were gone.
There's some of it going on. Like I mentioned, the kid earlier, Bam from highest grade, he is of Afghani descent, and his father was a attaché, a member of the Afghani government, so to speak. And he asked his father if he could get him some seeds, and his father kind of thought, well, yeah, whatever. But then when he realized, and this is to paraphrase, not to tell Bam's story wrong, but once his father realized how passionate Bam was, he, you know, and Bam asked him, can you send people out to get different seeds from different geographic locations? And could you log those geographic locations so I know what they came from? But I want diversity, not just a handful of seeds. I want multiple selections from multiple areas. And his father realized his son's passion. He did do that, and was subsequently, unfortunately, later died in a suicide bombing. But he did bring those Afghani genetics back to BAM. They're in Santa Cruz, California, and currently being bred and grown. So it's. Do
you know what year they were brought there?
What year they were brought to Afghanistan?
No, to Santa Cruz.
To Santa Cruz. I would think in the last 3 to 5 years.
Wow.
Oh, okay. So very recently.
Current day
stuff.
Oh,
that sounds really, really wonderful.
Yeah. And the kid just, I mean, his growth methodologies, his ethics, his way of thinking. I mean, it's refreshing to see people like that in the next generation. But to think outside the box and really capture and preserve some of those old world genetics, I can never give him enough props for that.
That's really cool. You know, I mean to interrupt what you guys are saying. You know, Tom was able to stay on with us till about 12, and it's coming up. And you know, I wanted to just thank you, Tom, for joining us. Everybody, when I reached out to Tom and Mel Frank and Rob and Sam and you, of course, especially, and Etienne, you're all, and Richard, I don't mean to leave anyone out. Everybody was just so enthusiastic about the idea of it. I think something we've all had in common for so long is a desire to disseminate truthful and positive information about cannabis. And, you know, Tom, you've been a hero to me for decades for doing just exactly that. And I wanted to thank you for coming on with us today. And hopefully you liked it, and you'll come on as many weeks as you are able.
You're welcome, but I'll repeat what I said at the beginning. It's an honor for me to be with you guys, because I think you did more than I did. I was just messenger boy.
Well, quite the message. So thank you for being the messenger boy. Me and Kenny, and
Well,
I'm sure thousands that'll watch this will say thank you.
One thing you can do, Tom, is, and everybody else out there, think of a guest you would like to have and let Todd know.
That'd be fantastic.
We'll be as strong as our guests and our topics of discussion.
100%.
Yes, anybody watching can go. We've got a community website, TalkingCANNABIS.live. You can join and you can bring up questions, bring up guests. The whole idea of this being interactive and community based is really my goal, and there's no shortage of information to share. And I just hope that we can, continue to do this and bring a lot of information, inspire people as you've inspired me and others. And this is my way of saying thank you in a way. So from us all, I want to say thank you.
I'll bet you anything Tom knows hundreds of interesting people.
Oh, I know a lot of people that might come on.
Well, we'll work on it. I think that we can all bring together a lot of good people that really deserve some recognition and deserve to talk about what they've been working on, in some cases for decades.
It's a magic time to be able to set the record straight historically and give the credit where credit's due. And you're nothing without a foundation. And people like Thomas and Thomas Prasad, Mel, Jim, Ed, there's dozens of them that contributed to this industry that people really need to know where they come from.
I think somebody that might be interesting is your fellow amigo, not George Cervantes, although he might be welcome.
Jeff Lowenfels, yeah, he'll be on.
He might be interesting because that is one of the secrets to high resin yield, is lots and lots of fine roots in good soil.
Well, he has 3 books on it, and they're all teaming, the trilogy of teaming with microbes, teaming with nutrients, and this new one, teaming with mycorrhizal fungi. And so, yeah, he'll come on.
Has he ever actually done work where he's analyzed an identical clone grown in with and without these, and seen a difference of the what kind of percentage difference there is in the dry product?
I don't think so. He grows up in Alaska, both outdoors and in a greenhouse, and he uses mostly auto flowering because of the situation of the climate. But I'll ask him. I don't think he has, though. I think he just grows for himself.
Well, and I was just wondering if he saw any scientific results that actually showed the difference between barren soil and micro-rich soil.
Most of his stuff he's dug up from research papers from universities, and I don't think he's done hands-on stuff.
Well, this is all stuff we can bring up next week. I mean, Richard, I know you got to go as well. You got to get off too, Richard?
Yeah, I do.
So, maybe we'll wrap this up, guys. And, we did a couple hours, and there's still plenty to talk about. So let's meet back here next Saturday and do some more Talking Cannabis.
Sounds good.
Thank you all again
for joining
us. See you then, everybody.
See ya.
And everybody out there, please think of guests and subjects you'd like to discuss.
Join the community, and we'll see you there.
Yeah, we also have a Facebook group. We're on Twitter, and we're on Instagram, all Talking Cannabis. So thank you again, everybody, and tune in next Saturday. Anything else you want to say, Kenny?
Thank you very much, all of you, for participating. This has been really incredible to hear the history and everything else.
Next week, we'll have Mel Frank as well with us. All right, everybody. We're out.